Amazon just announced the release date of the first episode of their Lord of the Rings related show, so far known as LotR or Lord of the Rings on Prime. The date is the 2nd September 2022, but what is more interesting is that they also posted an image, most likely from the first episode, according to an article I will link in the description. The things we see on it are quite surprising for a lot of Tolkien fans. In my opinion, it was also a very smart choice for a first image, because it has some interesting details that make people curious, and it's good for theorizing, as we will see. I also did a live stream that day in which we analyzed what we see on that image, crafting some theories. I also had Helen, aka the Clueless Fangirl, as special spontaneous guest. The stream is 5 hours long though, and maybe not all want to watch all of my confused rambling, so here are my more condensed and ordered thoughts of what I found out so far, with some supporting book quotes. You voted for it in the poll on YouTube. We will also discuss some theories, a too long didn't watch version so to say, which is still quite long, you know me. Typical disclaimers. Shoutouts to Kimberly80, Ted Nasmith, Jenny Dolphin, Benev, Niati, Sara Morello, and Laura Taunton, the artists that gave me the permission to use the artworks, which you will see in this video. Also, spoiler warning, and I tend to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, so embrace the LotR. So what's the deal with this image? Let's start with when. The show will play in the Second Age, so in the time 3000 to 6500 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings. What surprised me most was that this image shows an era in the history of Arda, the world of Lord of the Rings, that is called Years of the Trees. There are 3 eras: the Years of the Lamps, the Years of the Trees, and the Years of the Sun. Some people count the Years of the Trees towards the First Age, others don't. I usually mean with First Age, the First Age of the Years of the Sun, and keep it this way in this video. We know the image shows a time from the Years of the Trees because we see the glowing 2 trees of Valinor in the background, which gave this era the name. With this, it is definitely from a time more than 7050 years before the events of Lord of the Rings at the end of the Third Age. This in addition could mean that the scene we see here is from a flashback or the prologue. We remember the prologue narrated by Galadriel of Peter Jackson's first Lord of the Rings film. This prologue also shows events from the previous age, the Second Age, so in parts events that were around 4400 to 3000 years in the past. This might be a very similar scene here, and as mentioned, it's according to an article from the first episode, which would be fitting for a prologue. But what's the deal with those 2 trees? At this time in Tolkien's mythology, Sun and Moon did not exist yet. We ignore Tolkien's unpublished and abandoned round world version of Arda, where this might be different. During the Years of the Trees, those special 2 trees and the stars were the only light source of the world. When the first elves awoke in Cuiviénen in that time, which is a bay on the central continent of the world called Middle-earth, the first thing they saw when they opened their eyes were the stars, which they culturally love because of that. Note, it was also always night outside of Aman during the Years of the Trees. These elves also heard the Sea of the Bay first, and elves usually also love the sea, especially the Teleri elves, one of the 3 great clans. And then they were invited by the gods or high angels to live with them on the west continent called Aman, to save them from an evil power in the form of Sauron's master Melkor and his servants, including Sauron. And here we can already partially answer the question where. In Aman stood the 2 trees of Valinor. Valinor is a realm of these angels called Ainur. The group of the high angels are the Valar. The group of the lower ranked angels are the Maiar. For example, Gandalf, Saruman or even Sauron are Maiar. If we look at the map, Valinor is west of this mountain range, the Pelori. Though not all elves went to Aman, but those who did also loved the 2 trees. One of the two trees was called Laurelin, her light was golden. The other was Tirion, his light was silver. In the picture we slightly see this too. They stood on the hill Eärendil, west of Valmar, the legendary city of the Valar and Maiar. It should be mentioned that the trees glowed in an alternating cycle that also had a small overlap. This artwork by Benef shows it quite well, and we also see the hill. In addition, quote, "She, the Valavarda, queen of the stars, took the silver dews from the vats of Tirion, and therewith she made new stars and brighter against the coming of the firstborn." So the stars the elves saw and laughed were in parts also made from the light of one of the two trees. Tirion was as a result much loved among the elves who saw the two trees, which not all elves did. We see a white trunk for the right tree if we zoom in a bit, so that must be Tirion, who is also called the white tree in the Silmarillion. Quote, "Of all things in Valinor, they loved most the white tree." Some might now ask what happened with the two trees, and the answer limits the time frame of the image. The two trees got destroyed by Melkor, who was later called Morgoth, which is the mentioned master of Sauron, and by Ungoliant, the very powerful mother of Shelob, who devoured the trees. So all that was left of them and their light after that were the stars, three powerful jewels called the Silmarilli, one last flower of Tirion, and one last fruit of Laurelin. Out of the last fruit, the sun was made by the Valar, and out of the last flower of Tirion, the moon was made. And sun and moon were each put into a vessel made by Aule, the Valar of smithing, and put into the sky, each guided by a powerful Maya. Arien guided the sun and Tilion the moon. So when we see the two trees, we know it was before the first age of the years of the sun. There is no overlap in time between the two trees and sun and moon. Men awoke when sun first rose, so we can exclude men being present too. Tolkien later tried to move the awakening of men 3,000 years further into the past for complicated lore reasons, but never finished this process. Interestingly, if we could only see one lesser version of the white tree not giving light in the city close to the highest building, things would be completely different. Then the tree would be Galadriel, and it could be even during the years of the sun. Also, the tree here is potentially missing on the image. With this we answered the question when and in parts where, but the where has more nuance to it. So where does the scene on the image play? Of course on the west continent Aman, but where exactly? What city do we see? I originally thought it was Valmar in Valinor, the mentioned city of the Ainur, the angels, because it was close to the two trees. But some details do not fit, for example the mountains to the left and right, maybe it being on a hill, the Ring of Doom missing, and with a closer look the two trees also seem too far away. So it's most likely not Valmar. The two trees on the hill are west of Valmar. Quote, "Before its western gate there was a green mount, Eärendil, and they sat silent upon their thrones of council in Mahanaxar, the Ring of Doom, near to the golden gates of Valmar, and Yavanna Kementari sang before them, and they watched." So I imagine the trees being close, and in between Valmar and the trees must be the Ring of Doom. If we look at the hills and distances, the trees are very big, but also very far away from the city we see. We also don't see the Ring of Doom, but the view could be blocked by the city itself. About Valmar we can also read, "In the midst of the plain beyond the mountains, they built their city Valmar of many bells." The area does not look really plain, and I guess the artists would have placed bells that we can see in the picture to make this more apparent if it was Valmar. In addition, the streets are described as golden. Quote, "And the elves could tread on the golden streets of Valmar." And we had the mention in the quote before that also the gates of Valmar were golden, at least the west gate. We don't really see that here too. What other places could this be? We have Alqualonde, but that was directly at the coast and had a harbor with elvish swan ships. We see some swan ships, but at its east side we should see the sea, the coast of the bay, and a harbor. The trees would be west of it too though, but I think you could not see the two trees so well from there, because the city was a bit more north. Then we have Avalone, which was on the island Tol Eressëa. The image does not look like we are on an island, and it was a harbor city at the coast. You could maybe see the two trees from there, but there's no sea in front of a mountain range where we see a narrow pass with another city, that is Tirion, on a hill in that pass, so that does not fit. Forminos would be possible too, but it is much further north, maybe in the Pelori, quote, in the hills. It was likely more of a fortress and smaller too. In addition, we should see some other points of interest from that angle, looking at the two trees, which would be more in the south. So the Pelori should be somewhat parallel to our view direction if you look at the two trees from there. Some might theorize this could be on Middle-earth looking west over the ocean to the other side, because the world was still flat at that time and you could look very far, ignoring the abandoned round world version of Tolkien. But during the time of the two trees there was, except for Doriath, no big elven city like this in Middle-earth. Of course, for example, Gondolin was inspired by Tirion, but it was built after the two trees were destroyed. In addition, the water looks more like a river and not like an ocean in between. And the trees would be far too big in this case too. As said, this must be on the west continent Aman. From my perspective, the place the image shows is indeed Tirion. Tirion was built on the green hill Tuna. We see a city on a green hill, which is already a good indicator. Another indicator are the mountains at the left and right border, implying that the city lies in a mountain pass. In my opinion, that pass could be Calakiria. We can read in the Silmarillion, "To these, the elves, the Valar had given a land and dwelling place. Even among the radiant flowers of the tree-lit gardens of Valinor, they longed still at times to see the stars, and therefore a gap was made in the great walls of the Pelori, and there, in a deep valley that ran down the sea, the Eldar raised a high green hill. Tuna it was called. From the west the light of the trees fell upon it, and its shadow lay ever eastward." And a few lines further, "Then through Calakiria, the path of light, the radiance of the blessed realm streamed forth, kindling the dark waves to silver and gold, and it touched the lonely isle, and its western shore grew green and fair." So the light of the trees in the west reached the hill, the city, and even further to the mentioned island Tol Eressëa, east of the bay. So this pretty much aligns with what we see on the image. The shadows of the trees also point east, obviously, if we consider the trees being the light source in the west. There is also the event called the Hiding of Valinor, but this happens after the two trees were destroyed. In this event, the Pelori, the mountains we maybe see on this image, were raised even higher, though here they already look pretty high and steep. However, even at that time the pass Calakiria was still there, but the Valar placed towers with sentinels along it and an army that was impossible to pass on the way. On the Pelori was in addition a sleepless watch, and they became impossible to pass too, but what we see here must have been before the hiding of Valinor as a result, and so Calakiria looks a lot more friendly to travel through in the image. There is one thing I could not confirm or deny. If the two trees are in the west, here on the image, Tirion is on the south side of the pass, and that is where Taniquetil should be, the highest mountain of Arda. On its top, the king of the Valar resides. Quote from War of the Jewels. Calakirian, the cleft of light, the pass in the Pelori, not far from the north side of Taniquetil, through which the light of the trees in Valinor flowed out to the shores of Aman. The spelling of Kalakiria is different in this source, and it's from originally unpublished material of Tolkien, so take this information with a grain of salt, but it hints at Taniquetil being south. I could not really find a hint if Tirion is at the south side of the pass, in the middle, or at the north side of it. In the Atlas of Middle-earth, Karen Wynne Fonstedt placed it a bit closer to the north side in contrast to the image here. All I could find was this quote. Moreover, Tuna beneath Taniquetil was set nigh to the girdle of Arda. Beneath Taniquetil could be interpreted as closer to the south side and as a result closer to Taniquetil, but maybe it was also in the middle of the pass. If we look at the details of the city, we also find a few interesting points. Quote, upon the crown of Tuna, the city of the elves was built, the white walls and terraces of Tirion, and the highest of the towers of that city was the tower of Ingwe, Mindon El Dalieva, whose silver lamp shone far out into the mists of the sea. White city with terraces seem to fit perfectly, and we also see a high tower, which could be Mindon El Dalieva. However, we don't see a silver lamp shining from it. Maybe it is in maintenance in this scene. What we don't really see are the, quote, crystal stairs of Tirion upon Tuna. We see some stairs at this gate, but it does not look like crystal stairs, but it's hard to see. Though when Elrond's father Eärendil, later in the first age of the Years of the Sun, enters Tirion, we can read in the Silmarillion, he walked in the deserted ways of Tirion, and the dust upon his raiment and his shoes was a dust of diamonds, and he shone and glistened as he climbed the long white stairs. So here the stairs are white. Maybe it's a white crystal like quartz or simply different types of stairs. But diamond dust should be a thing we might see glittering in the distance. In the Book of Lost Tales Part 1 we find an early version of this text, and here it's dust of gold and magic metals of Aule that stuck to his clothes. Reading this I thought that gold dust maybe would make roofs golden. We see golden roofs, but I could find no reference for that. In addition, we can read in the Parma Eldalamberon issue 17, containing Tolkien's commentary on the words and phrases he used. Many jewels were embedded in the rocks of its Kalakeria's wall. This aspect is missing too and fits the mentioned diamond dust. In some notes, the origin of the dust is Aule, the smith of the Valar. However, that might have been a bit too much for the scene, so I can see why it's not there. A much bigger unusual detail is the river we see. I searched for quite some time but could not find any hint at a river. Of course, east of Tirion, behind the back of the person we see, there is a bay and the ocean. In the Atlas of Middle-earth, Karen Wynne Fonstedt also placed, I think, a small river there, but I could find no reference for that. If you know a quote, feel free to post it in the comments. The river seems to flow from the direction of the two trees to the sea, and I know that there were the wells of Varda close to the trees, but in those the dew of the trees was stored. I don't see them forming a river, and even if, the water should glow like the trees. However, considering the mountains nearby and the sea close to Tirion, it does not seem implausible to see a river there. We also see the classic elven swan ships, which were ships used by the Teleri elves, one of the original 3 elven clans, who were the mariners of the elves in Aman. They first lived in the mentioned city of Avalone on Tol Eressëa, which means Lonely Island, and then moved to the mainland and built Alqualonde. We can read in the Silmarillion, for that Alqualonde was their city and the haven of their ships, and those were made in likeness of swans, with beaks of gold and eyes of gold and jet. Jet is a black coal-related gemstone. We know they used their ships to sail around, but as said, they did not live in Tirion. Only the clan of the Noldor elves and for some time the clan of the Vanyar elves lived in Tirion. The Vanyar later moved further west to Valinor, to the land beyond those mountains close to the foot of Taniquetil. Considering all this, I still think Tirion is a really good answer to what this city could be. So that leaves us with the final question. Who is a person on the screen? Of course, it's impossible to give a definitive answer, but there are multiple theories. Some I can maybe weaken or even debunk if the show follows the book's lore. Some suggested it was Eärendil, Elrond's father, but that would not be possible because he was not born yet. He is half-elven and as a result his father was originally counted towards men. Complicated story. And as we learned, men awoke when the sun first rose, so after the destruction of the two trees. The idea behind the theory is of course that he went to Tirion when he reached Aman later. Some speculate that it is Sauron or Mairon as he was called according to the Parma Eldalamberon issue 17 before he joined his master Melkor. I really like the theory, but I think it has a flaw. According to the Silmarillion, Sauron was already in the service of Melkor before the elves were in Aman. So for the person on the image to be Sauron, the city has to be Valmar. If it's Tirion, a city built by the elves, it can't be him. And in my opinion, it being Tirion is most likely as we discussed. Quote, "That stronghold was commanded by Sauron, lieutenant of Melkor, and it was named Angband." This is from chapter 3, which is at the beginning about the War of the Powers, and that took place before the elves reached Aman. It is also explicitly mentioned that Angband was part of this war too. Quote from the same chapter. "Nonetheless, the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and caverns hidden with deceit far under the fortresses of Angband and Utumno. Utumno was the main stronghold of Melkor. It's hard to say when Sauron joined Melkor exactly, but in my opinion it was relatively early, most likely even before the elves awoke. As a result, it seems unlikely that Sauron just walks around in the land of his enemies who are also vastly more powerful than him. Of course, there was the time when Melkor was pardoned after a 3 ages long captivity, a consequence of losing the war, and was allowed to live in Aman for some time. But Sauron is not mentioned there, just that after the War of Powers, Sauron escaped and could not be captured. In Aman, he awaited judgment for his actions, and that is not mentioned in the books. Sauron most likely stayed in Middle-earth and prepared Angband for the return of his master from captivity. Another popular theory, which I also see as likely, is that this person is Galadriel. It would be very nice if she again narrated the prologue. Some people suggested it would be awesome if it's the voice of Cate Blanchett, and I agree, but it might be a too strong contrast to the voice Galadriel would normally have in the show, except they would pull a surprise Cate Blanchett as Galadriel. Most assume it's Morfydd Clark, I think. When it comes to the timeline, Galadriel would fit perfectly. I think she was even most likely born in Tirion. An argument that could be made against this are 2 small details. Galadriel is known for her hair, which was radiant silver golden. One of her grandmothers had golden hair as a Vanya elf, one of the big and most noble elven clans known for their blonde hair, and her mother was a Teler elf and had silver hair. In addition, it was said her hair was lit with gold as though it had caught in a mesh the radiance of Laurelin, so the light of one of the 2 trees. In the Unfinished Tales, we find notes of Tolkien where he increased her power and importance, including her hair. Quote, "The Eldar said that the light of the 2 trees, Laurelin and Telperion, had been snared in her, Galadriel's, tresses. So now the light of both trees and also here the influence of the silver hair of her mother is mentioned, for its gold was touched by some memory of the star-like silver of her mother. In the image we don't really see this radiant hair with the light of the trees in it. There is another detail which is maybe hard to see, but it looks like the person carries a sword. We see a little shadow, and as a result the person's left hand is maybe on the pommel of the sword or the end of the hilt. It seems a bit unlikely for Galadriel carrying a sword, but of course it's not impossible. According to the unfinished tales, her mother name was Nerwen, which means man-maiden. She grew to be tall, beyond the measure even of the women of the Noldor. She was strong of body, mind and will, a match for both the lawmasters and the athletes of the Eldar in the days of their youth. This does not say she carried a sword, but I can see how someone could make an argument for that. This could also explain her not having long hair and maybe wearing a bun, it's hard to see. Still, I like that theory too, and it's definitely not impossible. Beyond it being just a random elf, a lawmaster like Rumil, or even Galadriel's father Finarfin, who also had blonde hair, or a Maya, I think it's also an interesting theory that this person could be Glorfindel. Helen, aka the clueless fangirl, brought it up in the stream, so shoutouts to her. Glorfindel had blonde hair too, and I would argue if you look at the edge of the hair, the color might be blonde here or brown, so that could fit. And he also was a warrior known for slaying a Balrog when he and his people fled from Gondolin through the mountains. I can see him having a sword. Interestingly, having a sword also maybe narrows the point in time further. Quote from the previously mentioned time after Melkor's captivity when he lived in Aman. And when Melkor saw that these lies were smoldering and that pride and anger were awake among the Noldor, he spoke to them concerning weapons. And in that time the Noldor began the smithying of swords and axes and spears. Before that, there were maybe no or only very few weapons in Aman, so according to the annals of Aman in Morgoth's Ring, we can maybe theorize about a time around years of the trees 1450 to 1490, so roughly 450 to 50 solar years before the two trees were destroyed. The destruction of the trees happened around 50 years before the years of the sun began. However, like Galadriel, Glorfindel traveled back to Middle-earth during the Second Age to help the elves, especially Gil-galad and Elrond, against Sauron. In The Lord of the Rings, he saves Frodo, bringing him to Rivendell. In the film, it's Arwen. And he is also mentioned and present during the Council of Elrond. He also makes the Witch King prophecy in the Third Age. Not by the hand of man will he fall. So he has some ties to the Second Age and even Lord of the Rings in the Third Age, same as Galadriel. That he arrived during the Second Age is mentioned in the Peoples of Middle-earth. Quote, but it may have been, perhaps more probably, as late as circa 1600, the Years of Dread, when Barad-dûr was completed and the One Ring forged. So one could expect him to be in the show, and he was also most likely born in Tirion. As a result, I think Glorfindel or Galadriel are the most likely candidates. Maybe there are some more good theories. Let me know in the comments. As you can see, there is a ton of detail to uncover here, and in my opinion they chose the image very well, because fans of the lore have something to speculate about. It's also very cool to see Aman. At the end of The Lord of the Rings, that is where the elves are sailing to, minus the two trees. But just seeing the two trees alone is very exciting for a lot of fans, because they are so important in the lore and for understanding the culture of the elves, which might play a big part in the series. On top of that, a lot of events of the Years of the Trees and the First Age of the Years of the Sun are also reflected and referenced in the Second Age, so the series has to explain some of those. I also hope I could shed some light into this for people who know the lore or are new to it. Thank you for watching. Short summary of 10 to 15 minutes, he said. Well, what can I say? I love to talk about Tolkien and I'm often lost in details, but you voted for this video and we all know how this would end. I really try to provide sources for what I say here, and I hope you enjoyed this detailed analysis. I was maybe able to dig out some information you probably have not heard yet. If you want to know more about the elven clans or the two trees, check my History of the Elves or my Why Elves Like Trees video. The topic is really complex. If you liked this video, feel free to press the like button. I'm also interested in your thoughts and theories in the comments. I usually read almost all and answer most comments. Though I'm less interested in political or ideological driven discussions, or if people think the show will be bad. I heard it all at this point and we have too little information yet to have a fruitful discussion. Let's stick to what we know and the book's lore. Also, sorry going silent for such a long time. If nothing out of schedule happens, next video will be the first part of my Who is Elrond video, maybe about 2 hours long. Then there will be 1 or 2 more parts, also far over an hour long. We go into a lot of detail, but it takes time to produce. The script alone is like 70 pages with 50,000 words. The 95-minute long Círdan and the History of the Elves video had 24 pages for comparison, so it's a massive video project. I also want to make a History of the Dwarf video and maybe a Who is Galadriel video in the future too, so massive projects. Plan is, after the first part of the Elrond video, some other things will return again, like new podcast episodes, lore Q&A live streams, some gaming content, etc. I also have a small change to announce and discuss. I still stream playing games bad on Twitch, usually 2 times a week. Currently we play a cool new indie game called Unbound Worlds Apart. Full recommendation if you like platformers, so maybe check my stream too. In case you are still listening and are not subscribed yet, maybe, just maybe, consider pressing the subscribe button and the stupid bell. It was a pleasure, and I can finally fulfill showing my YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers in the credits for this video. Shoutouts to those guys. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.